In the late summer of 1886, a group of Paiute fishermen working the pre-dawn waters of Pyramid Lake began reporting encounters with something that defied understanding. The white agents from the reservation office dismissed the first whispers as old superstitions or too much whiskey. But men who had fished these waters their whole lives, men who knew the lake like their own hands, began to refuse the night nets. They spoke of a presence, a watching, something that understood their movements, knew their routines, and waited with the patience of a thinking mind. What happened there should have stayed buried beneath the dark waters, a secret kept by the lake itself. But memory, unlike water, does not always settle. It clings. My name is Hoban. My face, now, is a roadmap of sun and wind, crisscrossed with lines that tell their own stories. My eyes, once a sharper brown, have faded some, but they still see the shimmer of the lake in my mind's eye, still trace the impossible shapes from that summer. I wasn't the leader, not the young one, just a man of 50-odd years then, whose hands knew the weight of a full net and the pull of the lake's currents as well as any. I watched, I listened, and I remember. That summer, the days grew long and heavy, heat shimmering off the high Nevada desert. Even the nights offered little true cool, only a dry stillness that seemed to press down on the land. But on the lake, our lake, it was different. Pyramid Lake, deep and ancient, always held a coolness, a mineral tang that cut through the sagebrush scent. It was the heart of our world, not just water, but a living entity. A sacred place, yes, but also where we worked, where we lived. The Cui-ui, our sacred fish, sustained us. Our lives revolved around its cycles, the rhythm of its runs, the pull of our nets. Fishing wasn't sport, it was breath. Our boat was a familiar thing, a worn canvas stretched over a frame of willow and pine, sturdy and silent when we needed it to be. In the black pre-dawn hours, it was just a shadow on the water, part of the lake itself. In it, besides myself, were three others. There was Thomas Winnemucca. He was in his early 60s then, a man who carried the esteemed Winnemucca name, a nephew to the great chief. His hair, streaked with silver even then, was often tied back with a leather thong, revealing a strong, intelligent face. His eyes, dark and knowing, had seen much, understood more. Thomas moved with a calm deliberation, whether casting a net or speaking in council. He was rooted in the ancient stories, a keeper of knowledge. He was our quiet authority. Then there was Koa, a vibrant young man of 19, strong-limbed, quick to laugh, full of an easy confidence that only youth can carry. He was agile, eager, his dark eyes often holding a hopeful glint, though he'd not yet seen the true edges of the world. He respected Thomas deeply, but his reverence for the old ways, for the deep legends, was still more taught than felt. He was learning the lake, the nets, the stories. And Javier, in his early 30s, a capable fisherman, but one whose spirit was more easily swayed by fear. He was shorter than the rest of us, lean, with a permanent furrow in his brow. His hands often fidgeted, his eyes darting, even when all was calm. He was Paiute, yes, but had spent more time on the fringes of settler towns than most of us. Perhaps that left him less grounded in the communal beliefs that sustained us, less prepared for what the lake might truly hold. Our days began long before the sun. The sky would be a deep indigo, almost black, the stars still bright, before the first blush of dawn painted the eastern mountains. We'd push off from the northwestern shore, near the Great Pyramid, the distinct rock formation that gave the lake its name. Sometimes the wind would be up, a low hum across the water, carrying the distant calls of waterfowl. Other times, like that particular stretch of weeks, the air would be still, the lake surface like polished obsidian. In those weeks leading up to the end of summer, a faint unease began to stir. Not just among us, but from other camps too. Whispers carried on the wind, stories told in hushed tones around the fires. Fishermen spoke of unusual silences on the water, moments when the constant hum of wind, the slap of wavelets, the cry of birds, all of it would just cease. as if the lake itself held its breath. Nets, set deep and anchored firm, were found disturbed in impossible ways. Lines frayed clean through, not torn by rocks or snagged by snags, but cut with a precision that hinted at intent. Sometimes, men swore they saw fleeting shadows beneath their boats, moving with an unnatural speed at depths no fish could manage. A flicker of pale green, a glint of silver. But when they looked again, there was nothing. Just the deep, dark water. Javier was the first among us to voice his disquiet. "It's the currents," he'd say, more to himself than us, his eyes scanning the surface, shifting. Or maybe some new kind of fish. Koa, eager to prove his practical sense, would nod. "It's just tired men seeing things in the dark. Too much looking at the deep water." They dismissed these stories as superstition, as the ramblings of men who'd spent too many nights alone under the vast, empty sky. But Thomas, he listened. He never dismissed them. He'd just nod, his dark eyes holding a knowing quietness, a weight that stretched back through generations. He knew the old stories, the legends of the times Cui-ui Ticutta, asterisk, the water people who were said to inhabit the lake. He never spoke of them then, not out loud, but his silence was a heavier answer than any words. One particular pre-dawn trip stands out. The moon was a sliver, barely a ghost in the indigo sky. The air, cold and dry, carried the smell of sage and wet rock. Our boat drifted, silent, oars shipped. Thomas, quiet as ever, was pulling a net, his gnarled hands working the rope with practiced ease. Javier sat opposite him, his eyes darting, his breathing a little too quick. Koa, at the stern, was humming a low, almost tuneless song, but even his voice seemed thin in the stillness. I sat near the bow, watching the dark water, feeling the familiar pull of the depths. We were near the base of the Great Pyramid, where the rock met the black water, a favored spot for Cui-ui. Thomas paused in his pulling. His hands, strong as they were, froze on the rope. He didn't speak, just stopped. We followed his gaze, not at the surface, but down, into the black water beneath our boat. At first, there was nothing, just the deep, dark, impenetrable blackness. Then, a flicker, a faint luminescence, deep down, far deeper than any firefly or phosphorescent algae I'd ever seen. It wasn't a steady glow, but an internal pulse, like a slow, deliberate beat, a cold light within the water itself. It was the color of a winter moon, pale and unsettling. It moved, not rushing, not darting, but with an impossible, slow grace, shifting beneath us. It was large, very large. A coldness seeped into the boat, not the usual desert chill that settled on the lake at night, but a different kind of cold. A penetrating cold that seemed to come from times within times, the water rising up, seeping into our bones. My breath hitched. I felt the hair on the back of my neck prickle, a sensation of being watched. Not just by something unseen, but by something intelligent, something that times knew, times we were there. Javier whimpered, a low, strangled sound that died in his throat. His eyes, wide with sudden, raw terror, were fixed on the luminous pulse below. Koa had stopped humming. He was stiff, pale, his young face suddenly drawn, a flicker of something ancient in his eyes. Even Thomas, though still outwardly calm, held his breath. The pulsing light shifted, moved away, then seemed to hover directly beneath us again. It swelled slightly, then dimmed. It was there for what felt like an eternity, though it could not have been more than a minute or two. An unnatural, suffocating silence descended, cutting off all other sounds. The low hum of the wind, the distant calls of waterfowl, all of it gone. Only the soft creak of our boat, the frantic beat of my own heart in my ears, and the terrible, cold light below. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. The coldness receded, leaving only the usual chill of the pre-dawn air. The natural sounds of the lake hesitantly returned. A distant ripple, a faint whisper of wind. There was no splash, no wake, No turbulence, just empty, black water, where moments before, an impossible light had pulsed. Thomas slowly, deliberately, began to pull his net again. His movements were steady, but I saw the slight tremor in his hands. He looked at us, his face etched with something I couldn't yet name. Doubt, perhaps, or something deeper. We said nothing. There was nothing to say. The experience had been too fleeting, too silent, wrong times to explain. It left only a lingering chill that refused to dissipate, and a question that twisted in my gut. What in the Creator's name had just happened? And was it truly gone? That lingering chill stayed with us long after the sun finally rose. It wasn't the cold of the desert night, but a cold that seemed to have seeped into our very bones, a memory of the impossible. We pulled the rest of our nets in a silence heavier than any we had known, each movement deliberate, our eyes darting to the water, then away. We caught little that morning. The Cui-ui, usually so plentiful in that favored spot, were absent. It was as if the lake itself had decided to hold its breath, or perhaps was simply empty. Back on shore, the usual banter was gone. Koa, usually so quick with a joke or a hopeful prediction, cleaned his gear with a grim set to his jaw. Javier moved with a jerky, restless energy, constantly looking over his shoulder, even though there was nothing but sagebrush and rock. He mumbled to himself, words I couldn't quite catch, but the tone was one of frantic denial. Thomas, though, was quiet. He watched us, and he watched the lake, his eyes dark and distant, seeing things we could not. Later that morning, when the sun was high and hot, burning away the last vestiges of the night's lingering fear, Thomas called us together. We sat in the shade of a small rock overhang, the air still and heavy. He did not ask what we had seen. He did not need to. He knew. My grandmother? He began, his voice low, steady. She spoke of them, and her grandmother before her. The times, Cui-ui Ticutta, asterisk, the fish-eaters, the water people. He paused, letting the ancient Paiute words hang in the still air. Javier shifted, nervously picking at a loose thread on his tunic. Koa sat stiff, his gaze fixed on Thomas, a new, unsettling understanding dawning in his young eyes. They are ancient, Thomas continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a story passed down through generations. Older than our people, older than the mountains. They have always been here, in the deep water, guardians, some say, keepers of the lake's secrets. He described them not as monsters, but as something far more unsettling, beings of intelligence, of immense age, who moved with a grace that was not of this world. Not malevolent, he stressed, but certainly not human. Their ways were not our ways. Their thoughts were not our thoughts. They lived in a world we could only glimpse, a world beneath the shimmering surface that held mysteries beyond our comprehension. He spoke of their forms, elongated and pale, of eyes that saw into the very soul of the lake, of a silent wisdom that predated all human memory. He spoke of how they watched, always watched, from the depths. His words were not meant to frighten us further. Rather, they were meant to ground the impossible in the bedrock of our people's history, to give a name to the nameless dread. For Koa, it was a brutal awakening. His youthful certainty, his easy confidence, seemed to crumble under the weight of Thomas's quiet conviction. He had always respected the old stories, but now they were no longer just stories. They were real. For Javier, Thomas's words only fueled a deeper, more frantic fear. His hands trembled, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He wanted to deny it, to dismiss it as old wives' tales, but the memory of the cold light beneath our boat was too vivid, too immediate. It pressed down on him, suffocating. And for me, I felt a profound chill, yes, but also a strange sense of validation. The fear was real, but it now had a name, a place in the tapestry of our world. It did not make it less terrifying, but it made it less alien, in a way. The lake, our lifeblood, our provider, had always been sacred. Now, It was also profoundly, terrifyingly alive. The Cui-ui, however, did not care for ancient legends or human fears. They were a necessity. Our families depended on them. Our bellies demanded them. So, despite the gnawing dread, despite the unspoken agreement that none of us wanted to return to that water, we had to. We prepared for another night's fishing, the air thick with a new kind of tension. Our movements were more deliberate, our eyes constantly scanning the horizon, as if the lake itself might rise up and confront us. The days that followed were different. The lake, usually a symphony of desert life, grew eerily quiet. The wind still hummed, but it seemed to carry no sounds from the shore. The distant calls of waterfowl, usually a constant companion to our work, were notably absent. The air itself seemed heavy, still, as if holding its breath. And then there was the smell. A peculiar, musky smell, like wet earth mixed with old metal, or perhaps something that had been submerged for centuries, only now beginning to stir. It was faint at first, easily dismissed as a trick of the wind, but it grew stronger each day, clinging to the air around the lake, a subtle, unsettling presence. On our next pre-dawn outing, the moon was again a sliver, casting long, stark shadows. The air was colder, the musky smell stronger. We launched the boat in near silence, each man lost in his own thoughts, his own rising fear. We rowed further out, away from the immediate shore, seeking the deeper waters where the Cui-ui would congregate. We set our nets, our movements practiced but now laced with a frantic edge. Javier's hands shook as he tied off a line, fumbling with knots he usually made blindfolded. Koa, usually so eager, so quick, moved with a newfound caution, his head constantly turning, his eyes wide and watchful. Thomas, ever the anchor, worked with his usual quiet deliberation, but even his jaw was set a little tighter, his gaze a little more intense. It began subtly, as it had before, a sudden, unnatural stillness on the water, a brief cessation of all ambient sound. Then, as Thomas began to haul in the first net, a flicker, a flash of pale, almost translucent skin just beneath the surface, moving with impossible speed along the length of the net. It was gone before any of us could get a clear look, a ghost of a shape. "Did you see that?" Javier's voice was a desperate whisper, his eyes darting to where the flash had been. "It was not a fish. Too fast. Too big." Koa said nothing, but his grip on his oar tightened, his knuckles white. We continued to pull the nets, our senses heightened, our hearts hammering against our ribs. The net Thomas was hauling felt strangely heavy, then suddenly light, as if something had passed through it, parting the waters around it without disturbing the mesh itself. He pulled it in, and it was empty. Not a single Cui-ui. Then, a movement near Koa's end of the boat, a swirling of the water, not a ripple from the wind, but a deliberate disturbance, as if a large, unseen body had shifted just below the surface. A shadow, elongated and impossibly quick, darted through the depths, a deeper shade of black against the already dark water. It was too long to be any fish we knew, too graceful, too purposeful. It moved with a silent, fluid power that defied any known creature. Javier gasped, a choked sound of pure terror. He clutched the sides of the boat, his eyes wide, frantically scanning the water, seeing shadows where there were none, his mind already fracturing under the strain. "It's watching us!" he hissed, his voice trembling. "It's watching!" Koa, too, was visibly shaken. The easy confidence of youth had vanished, replaced by a profound vulnerability. He sat rigid, his body tense, his gaze fixed on the water, no longer dismissing the unseen, but searching for it, dreading its next manifestation. He was learning, in the cruelest possible way, that the world was far larger, far stranger than he had ever imagined. I felt it too, the undeniable sensation of intelligent scrutiny. It wasn't just a presence in the water, it was a presence that was aware of times, us asterisk, of our fear, of our desperate need for the Cui-ui, It felt as if ancient, unseen eyes were fixed upon our small boat, evaluating, observing, perhaps even judging. The musky smell grew stronger, filling our nostrils, a constant reminder of the alien presence that surrounded us. We continued to pull in our nets, one after another, and each one came up empty. Yet, they felt heavy, strangely so, as if they were filled with the unseen weight of dread, of a presence that had passed through them, leaving only the chilling impression of its passage. The water remained silent around us, save for the soft creak of the boat and the ragged breathing of the men. No birds, no wind, just the vast, dark lake and the profound, unsettling knowledge that we were not alone. The night ended as it had begun, in near silence. We returned to shore with empty nets, our fishing trip a failure. But it was more than just a failure of the hunt. It was a shattering of our world, a confirmation of our deepest fears. The subtle hints, the fleeting glimpses, the unnatural silences, they had solidified into an undeniable truth. The Cui-ui Ticutta times were real. They were here, and they were watching. And that knowledge, that terrifying, undeniable knowledge, was a weight far heavier than any net full of fish. The truth of the Cui-ui Ticutta times settled upon us, heavy and cold as the lake itself. It was a truth that stripped away comfort, yet offered a strange, grim clarity. We were not alone. The world was not as simple as we had believed, but clarity, even of the darkest kind, doesn't fill an empty stomach. The Cui-ui were our sustenance, our livelihood, the very breath of our families. The nets had come up empty. The fear was real, a living thing within us, but the hunger was a more ancient, more insistent master. So we went back. We had to. The sun climbed and fell, painting the sky in colors that seemed too vibrant, too indifferent to our dread. Supplies dwindled faster than we could make them last. Each passing day saw the need for fish grow, a silent, mounting pressure. We spoke little of what we had seen, or rather, what we had not times seen clearly. The memory hung between us, a shared phantom. The lake maintained its unnatural quiet, the musky smell now a constant companion, a damp, metallic tang that clung to our clothes, our skin, our very breath. It felt like the air itself had been breathed by something ancient, then exhaled back into our world. On the third night after our empty nets, the moon was a thin, hooked claw in the pre-dawn sky, barely offering enough light to see our own hands. But it was enough to paint the distinctive pyramid rock formation in stark, unforgiving silhouettes against the indigo. The water was like polished obsidian, reflecting the sparse stars and the sliver of moon with cold precision. There was no wind, no sound save the creak of our boat and the muffled dip of our oars. The silence was not peaceful. It was a hungry, waiting silence, pressing in from all sides. We rowed with a grim determination, the knowledge of what lay beneath us a constant knot in our guts. This time, we went straight for the waters near the pyramid, a place we usually reserve for the deepest, most abundant hauls. It was a calculated risk, a desperate gamble. Perhaps, we thought, if we faced it directly, if we simply did our work, it would let us be. Foolishness born of desperation. We set the nets. Thomas, his face a mask of solemn resolve, worked with a practiced rhythm. Koa, however, was a tremor of nerves, his movements jerky, his eyes darting to every shadow on the water. Javier was worse. He clutched his hands so tightly his knuckles were white, his breath coming in shallow, ragged bursts. He kept muttering, low and frantic, to himself, about shadows and eyes. Then it happened. Not a flicker this time, not a shadow beneath the surface. This was a full, undeniable unveiling. From the dark water near the very base of the pyramid, where the ancient rock met the deeper, colder currents, they began to rise, one at first, then another, and another, slow, deliberate, graceful beyond any living thing I had ever witnessed. They broke the surface without a ripple as if the water itself parted to welcome them. They stood taller than any man, impossibly elongated, their forms slender and almost ethereal in the pale moonlight. Their skin, I remember it so clearly, shimmered. It was not the flat pallor of a dead fish, nor the slickness of a river stone, but a living, shifting surface, moving between a pale, almost translucent green and a watery silver. It caught the meager light and held it, reflecting it back into the sky. Their limbs were long, slender, ending in hands that were not hands as we knew them. The fingers were impossibly long, too many joints, too delicate, yet strong. And they were webbed. Not thick, rough webbing, but fine, almost transparent membranes stretching between each digit, like the fins of a deep-sea fish. They moved these hands with a slow, deliberate grace, a silent language of their own. But it was their eyes. They were large, dark, and utterly devoid of whites, reflecting the moonlight like the surface of the deepest lake. They were ancient eyes, intelligent eyes, and they were fixed on us, on our boat, on our small, terrified forms huddled within it. There was no aggression in them, no malice that I could discern. Only a profound, unsettling observation. They simply watched. The silence that followed their emergence was absolute. It was not merely the absence of sound. It was at times presence, times of silence, a vacuum that sucked all other noise from the world. The wind stopped. The distant calls of birds, already absent for days, seemed impossible now. Even the creak of our boat, the lapping of water against the hull, vanished. All I could hear was the frantic thump of my own heart, a drum against my ribs, and the ragged, terrified gasps of Javier. There were 4 of them, I counted. 4 towering figures, standing waist-deep in the water, their heads reaching higher than our mast, their dark, reflective eyes taking in every detail of our boat, our nets, our faces. They were beings from a world utterly alien to our own, yet they stood before us, real and undeniable. Javier could not bear it. He let out a strangled cry, a sound like a wounded animal. He began to thrash, clawing at the wooden sides of the boat, desperate to escape, to flee, to somehow make himself invisible. "No, not real, not real!" he shrieked, his voice raw with pure, unadulterated terror. He scrambled, trying to push himself over the side, to swim, to do anything but remain in that boat, under those impossible, silent eyes. His movements threatened to capsize us, to plunge us all into the cold, dark embrace of the lake and whatever lay beneath. Koa, the young one, was utterly frozen. His body was rigid, stiff as a winter branch. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the nearest water person, a mixture of profound awe and paralyzing terror etched onto his young face. He could not speak, could not move. His youthful certainty, his easy confidence, had been utterly annihilated. He was a statue of dread, a testament to the shattering of his world. Thomas, though, remained calm. His face was etched with something ancient, something that had seen much and understood more. He did not flinch, did not cry out. His gaze met that of the closest water person, and for a long, agonizing moment, it was as if they communicated, not with words, but with a silent, profound understanding. Thomas knew them. He recognized them from the old stories, from the whispers of generations. He understood that we were not being attacked, not yet. We were being observed, evaluated, perhaps even tested. His stillness was an anchor in the maelstrom of our fear, a quiet defiance against the impossible. And I, Hoban, I watched. I watched Javier's panic, Koa's frozen awe, Thomas's unwavering gaze, and I watched the time's Cui-ui Ticutta asterisk, their impossible grace, their shimmering skin, their webbed hands that seemed to hold the very air itself, their eyes, always their eyes, reflecting the moon and our fear. It felt like an eternity, those silent, unbearable minutes. Every beat of my heart was a hammer against time, stretching the moment, making it endless. Then, the closest one moved, slowly, deliberately, Its long, slender neck shifted, its head tilted just so, and then its mouth, a dark line in its pale face, it began to curl. Not a human smile, not a comforting smile. It was perfectly executed, a subtle, almost imperceptible upturning of the corners, revealing no teeth, no gums, just the dark, alien interior. It was a wrong smile, a gesture that was utterly alien, yet profoundly understandable. It spoke of ancient knowledge, of a knowing so vast it encompassed our fear, our desperation, our very insignificance. It communicated a profound, ancient understanding of our small place in their world, a world far older and stranger than we could ever comprehend. It was not cruel, it was merely aware. And that awareness, that silent, knowing smile, was the most terrifying thing of all. It was the smile of something that had watched generations come and go, and understood that we were merely a fleeting ripple on the surface of its eternal lake. The smile hung in the air, a silent question, an ancient declaration. It stayed for a moment, an eternity, etched into the pale face of the times. Cui-ui Ticutta, asterisk. Then, slowly, with the same impossible grace with which it had risen, the being began to sink. Not a dive, not a splash. It simply melted back into the water, its form blurring, shimmering, until it was gone. The others followed. One by one, those towering, silent watchers dissolved into the lake's embrace, leaving behind not a ripple, not a sound. The unnatural silence they had brought with them began to recede, but it did not leave completely. It lingered, a shroud over the water, a memory of its presence. When the last one had vanished, the air rushed back into my lungs, a ragged, painful gasp. The world returned, not as it was, but altered. The wind began to stir again, a low whisper across the water, carrying the scent of sage and the lake's mineral tang. But the sounds of the night, the distant calls of waterfowl, the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull, they did not return. The lake remained quiet, profoundly, terrifyingly quiet. Javier, who had been on the verge of plunging himself into the deep, crumpled to the bottom of the boat, a whimpering heap of terror. His body shook uncontrollably, his hands still clawing at the wood, leaving faint scratches in the worn surface. He buried his face in his knees, his breath coming in hoarse, desperate sobs. He was broken, utterly, irrevocably broken. Koa, the young one, remained frozen for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on the empty spot where the last being had disappeared. Slowly, as if waking from a deep, terrible dream, he lowered his gaze to the water. His face, usually so full of life and eager confidence, was now pale and drawn, etched with a profound, almost ancient sorrow. The youth had been stripped from him in those unbearable minutes, replaced by a somber understanding, a weight that no 19-year-old should have to carry. He looked at the water, then at his hands, then back at the water, as if seeing it for the first time, or perhaps for the last time. Thomas Winnemucca, however, was different. He did not collapse, did not weep. He simply stood, his steady hands still gripping the net rope, his gaze sweeping the lake as if expecting the beings to reappear at any moment. There was no fear in his eyes now, only a deep, weary recognition. He had seen the confirmation of his people's oldest stories, and it had cost him something in his spirit. I could see it. He looked older. Somehow, in those moments after they left, his face a roadmap of ancient knowledge and the burden of carrying it. He took a deep, shuddering breath, then looked at me, his dark eyes meeting mine. There were no words needed. We had seen, we had witnessed, and our world would never be the same. "The nets," Thomas said, his voice low, a rough whisper. "Leave them." We had no strength, no will to argue. The Cui-ui, the reason we were out there, the very sustenance of our people, no longer mattered. Nothing mattered but getting off that water, away from the profound, silent intelligence that lay beneath its surface. Thomas took the oars, his movements slow and deliberate, as if each stroke was an act of defiance against the crushing weight of what we had seen. He rowed us back to shore, not towards our camp, but towards a deserted stretch of beach further north, away from any other eyes, any other questions. The journey back was made in a silence more profound than any I had ever known. Javier continued to sob, a soft, broken sound that seemed to echo in the vast emptiness. Koa stared straight ahead, his youthful shoulders slumped, his spirit retreating inward. I simply watched the dark water, my mind replaying the impossibly long limbs, the shimmering skin, the large, dark, intelligent eyes, and that chilling, wrong smile. Every splash of the oars seemed to break a fragile spell, but the spell held. The lake was quiet, too quiet. When the bow of the boat scraped against the sand, Thomas did not speak. He simply stepped out, his feet sinking slightly, and began to pull the boat higher onto the shore. Koa, as if on autopilot, followed suit, his movements stiff and mechanical. I helped, my body feeling heavy, each muscle aching with a weariness that went beyond physical exertion. Javier, however, could not move. He lay in the bottom of the boat, curled into a ball, shaking. "Javier," Thomas said, his voice gentle but firm, "we are on land now." Javier did not respond. He merely whimpered, his eyes squeezed shut. It was clear then. The man we knew, the capable fisherman, was gone. The terror had claimed him completely. He would not return to the lake. He would not return to us. Not truly. He had seen the edge of the world, and it had broken him. We pulled the boat further up, leaving Javier where he lay for a moment, a testament to the night's devastation. Then, Thomas and Koa helped him, half carrying, half dragging him towards the distant glow of our campfires. He moved like a puppet with cut strings, his mind lost in the horror. Back at camp, the others were asleep, the fires banked low. We laid Javier in his bedroll, his body still trembling, his face slick with tears and fear. He would not speak of it, not that night, not ever again. He left the next morning, before dawn, without a word, disappearing into the vast desert, seeking a world where such things could not exist. We never saw him again. He was gone, a ghost of the man he once was, swallowed by the impossible truth he had witnessed. Koa, too, was changed. The eager spark in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, watchful gaze. He still came to the lake, for he was a Paiute, and the lake was life. But he moved with a new reverence, a profound respect, bordering on fear. The easy laughter of his youth was rare, replaced by a thoughtful silence. He had learned that the world was far older and stranger than he had been taught, and that lessons sometimes came with a terror that reshaped the soul. He grew into a man of deep contemplation, a keeper of quiet truths. His hands still skilled with the nets, but his spirit always attuned to the unseen depths. For Thomas Winnemucca, the encounter was a confirmation. He gathered the tribal elders, those wise men and women whose memories stretched back generations, whose knowledge was the bedrock of our people. He recounted the events of that night with a calm, unwavering authority, his voice steady, his eyes reflecting the deep truth of his words. I stood beside him, a silent witness, my presence lending weight to his testimony. Koa, too, was there, though he spoke little, his very presence a testament to the profound shift within him. The elders listened, their faces impassive, their eyes ancient and knowing. There was no disbelief, no scoffing, only a solemn nod of understanding. They affirmed the stories, the whispers of the time's Cui-ui Ticutta *, the ancient guardians of the lake. They spoke of a time when the world was younger, when the lines between human and spirit were thinner, when the water people were known, respected, and left undisturbed. The encounter, they said, was a reminder, a warning. The lake was sacred, yes, but it was also dangerous. It held secrets far older than our people, and those secrets demanded respect and distance. There was no formal decree, no written document. Our ways were not the white man's ways, but an understanding settled over the community. The area near the Great Pyramid, already considered sacred, became a place to be approached with even greater caution. Fishing continued, for we needed the Cui-ui, but never again with the same casual ease, never again with the same assumption of dominion. The lake was no longer just a source of food. It was a living entity, vast and unknowable, watched over by silent, ancient intelligences. The knowledge of the times, Cui-ui Ticutta times, was reaffirmed, not as a superstition, but as a living, breathing truth. And it was a truth to be kept within the tribe, a sacred secret not meant for the ears of the white agents, who would only dismiss it as savage superstition, or worse, try to exploit it. I am an old man now. My hands, once strong and nimble with the nets, are gnarled and spotted with age, trembling slightly as I cup a mug of bitter tea. The sun has etched deep lines into my face, and my eyes, though faded, still hold the vivid memory of that summer night. Decades have passed since we saw the water people, decades since Javier fled, since Koa found his quiet wisdom, since Thomas reaffirmed the ancient truths with the elders. Thomas Winnemucca, he lived a long life, a respected elder until the end. He carried the burden of that knowledge with grace, his calm demeanor never wavering. But I always saw the deep understanding in his eyes, the memory of that silent, knowing gaze. He taught the young ones the old stories, not as fables, but as living history, reminding them of the lake's power and its secrets. He knew, he always knew. Koa, the eager young man, he became a man of quiet strength, a leader in his own right, though never a chief. He spoke little of that night, but his actions, his reverence for the lake, his profound respect for the unseen, spoke volumes. He passed that quiet wisdom to his children, ensuring the new generations understood the gravity of the old stories, the realness of the things that dwell beneath the surface. He learned to live with the mystery, to respect it, to understand that not everything needed to be explained, only acknowledged. And me, Hoban, I continued to fish. I had to. It was my life, my family's life. But every time I put a boat on the water, every time I cast a net, I felt their presence. Not a threat, not a shadow waiting to snatch me, but a constant, intelligent observation. The lake became a place of profound beauty and profound mystery, a living entity that breathed and watched, its depths holding secrets I could never fathom. My fear never truly left me, but it transformed. It became a respectful awe, a cautious reverence. I learned to live with the knowledge that we are not alone, that our world is but a thin skin over something vast and ancient. In the years that followed, more white men came. They brought their steam-powered boats, their bigger nets, their loud machines, and their arrogant certainty. They measured the lake, claimed its shores, and built their roads and their towns. They looked at Pyramid Lake and saw only resources to be exploited, land to be settled, fish to be caught. They laughed at the old Paiute stories, dismissed them as primitive superstitions, the ramblings of uneducated men. They thought they understood everything, that their science and their logic could explain away all the world's mysteries. They did not know. They did not understand the weight of the water, the profound age of the land, the silent watchers beneath the surface. They pushed their boats into the sacred waters, fished with abandon, polluted the edges, and believed themselves masters of all they surveyed. They never saw the impossible forms rising from the deep. They never heard the profound silence. They never felt the ancient, knowing gaze. And if they had, they would have dismissed it, explained it away, or perhaps, like Javier, been utterly broken by it. But the water people, the times Cui-ui Ticutta *, they are still there. I know it. I feel it in the air that comes off the lake, in the way the moonlight sometimes seems to shimmer too brightly on the surface. They are patient. They are eternal. They watched our ancestors. They watched us. And they will watch the generations to come. They are the guardians of the lake, silent and ancient, indifferent to the transient arrogance of man. They wait. They observe, and they remember. The lake holds its secrets close, secrets far older than any human memory, secrets that will endure long after our boats have rotted and our towns have turned to dust. I am old now, and soon I will join my ancestors, but the water people will still be there, watching from the depths, forever guardians of their vast, dark, unknowable world. And that, I have learned, is simply the way of things.